what is open source? How do you define open source?
Well, the original definition of open source stemmed from free software. And nowadays, the term open source is much more popular simply because the word free software it can be a bit difficult to understand. But the original intentions did come from free software. So when we say software is free, we're not talking about the price of software. We're not saying that it doesn't cost you any money to develop or to buy it. That's not the point when we say free software. What we actually mean is that the software gives you freedom to use it for whatever purpose that you want, whether it is educational or building something, commercial or not commercial, freedom for you to own it, to learn under the hood, to tweak it to whatever you want to do, and then redistribute it to share the new capabilities with others. And that's the spirit of free software. It's the idea that we should share in our knowledge of how to build things so that we can end up with better products at the end of the day. And open source is one of the prerequisites for free software. So software, as you know, has source code, and most of the people don't look at the source code of their end user, but people who want to learn more about it and to modify it to improve it for their own workflow, seeing the source code is a requirement. And therefore, in order to respect the user's freedom when using the software, it becomes necessary to also share the source. And that's where the term open source comes from.
I understand. A few episodes back, I talked with somebody about, like we mentioned, I also like open source, and I think, for example, in IT, they have so many possibilities. There are so many possibilities, right? There are so many programming languages. There are so many the text editors, many softwares, right? That can help you if you want to do your job completely open source. You don't need to pay a dime. You don't need anything. Like, there are so many great resources, right? And this is something that it's a little bit a shame that in our industry is not like that. Like our industry, as you know, it's very proprietary. And in a way, I not laughed, but sad a little bit about that, because we thought we don't have any alternatives. And after that, I start looking a little bit online, and this way I discovered Blender BIM and you. And that's why I took contact with you. Where I want to get with this is, like, it is feasible to use only open source solutions for a company to deliver a product on par with proprietary software. Are we there? It's possible to do that?
Before I answer that, keep in mind that there's a lot of variety in users. So although depending on who you are, you might be used to delivering BIM with parametric data, which in programs like ArchiCAD and Revit and Tekla, and everything is 3D, and you can link it to spreadsheets and generate sheets, and there are scripts with Dynamo, and that might be your world. But at the same time, you have to keep in mind there's also a huge population which are still on AutoCAD. They're still doing just pure 2D. And so there are also people who focus on different aspects of the built environment. There are people who focus on GIS analysis, people who focus just on costing, people who do environmental analysis or lighting simulation. And so the question you get is free software there yet? Can you essentially complete commercial grade output with it? Depends on where you are in the pipeline. So, for example, if you are a lighting engineer and you do light simulation, free software definitely is there. Radiance, for example, is an extremely famous lighting simulation software, and it is incredibly capable and is seen as one of the benchmarks to which other proprietary lighting simulators have to compete against. So in fact, free software in the lighting simulation world can be said to be ahead of proprietary software. Structural analysis, for example, now this year we're taking it with a grain of salt. I'm not trained as a structural engineer, but there are programs like CodeAster and Salomeka for CFD. There is OpenFOAM, and they are incredibly capable pieces of software. They might not be as visible to users due to the lack of marketing or the lack of training courses and user interfaces, but in terms of capability, you could say that it's definitely there. When it comes to visualization and modeling, you have tools like Blender and FreeCAD, and they are incredibly powerful modeling packages. So in that case, it is there yet. It's already there. And in fact, the ability of modeling in Blender far surpasses the modeling tools given in most CAD packages. Then you have the question, does it offer the same level of domain-specific modeling? You know, do I have the huge libraries out there of drag and drop a door? And that's when you start saying, no, free software is not yet there. We don't yet have those libraries. We don't yet have those parametric capabilities yet. They are growing every day, but in my opinion, it's not there yet. So it really depends who you ask. Documentation is a big issue. Traditional 2D documentation, there's LibreCAD and QCAD, which will replace AutoCAD. But when it comes to the 3D style documentation, it's not there yet.
Yeah. So it's a little bit like it's going to be a little bit easier for people who like to tweak things, to try different things, but it's a little bit more difficult for the ones like, yeah, I want to open my AutoCAD or Tekla and have my interface. I know I'm friendly with it and just do my job, right? I think this is also because, yeah, the documentation, it's like you need to have the willingness to tweak a little bit, to try it a little bit, and you won't find baby steps. Not right now, actually. Yeah.
Correct. Not right now. What I discovered is that open source, you're right, is not common in the AEC industry, but actually there are lots of really small pockets that are really doing very cool things, but they're just hard to discover. So a group of us, actually first suggested by Dimitar from HOK, a big architecture firm, we came up with the idea of starting out with an open source architecture, but this includes all disciplines, a community of people who are willing to sort of push the boundaries and see what's possible. And there's actually a directory of free software which relates to open source, which relates to the AEC industry, sorry. And I think there's nearly or exceeding 100 programs on there, just that they're just not quite so well integrated. So there's still a bit of work to be done.
Yeah.
But progress is being made.
Yeah. Yeah. It's difficult to really compete with the paid solutions because like you have people hired for that, right? And here people just use their own private time to develop this, right? And it's like we need more resources as well and more interested, right? It will definitely help. And because I think we get to a point like with the paid solutions, just knowing I'm thinking from the perspective of a company, right? If they would consider like a company that it's working already, not a startup or a one person. One person might do that because they don't want to pay hefty fee for Autodesk or something, right? But a company that is producing already to switch to completely to open source needs to be they must think twice, because they like you have support, right? This is the thing with the proprietary solutions. Like, you have support, you have a company. If you get in trouble, you get someone to help you. You paid for it, of course, you pay for it. But with open source, like, you need to fix it yourself or to wait until a solution is coming up, right? So I'm not saying this is bad, but I'm thinking like this might be a challenge for bigger businesses to integrate it. I know there are many companies, many architects using Blender in big companies as well, but for visualizations purposes, right? Not for the entire workflow, for all the disciplines, and for an integrated workflow, right?
Yeah, I as much as I do like open source and free software, I do have to say, to be realistic, I would not encourage big companies which already have a large percentage of their workforce on existing platforms to, at the moment, think that it's feasible to migrate. That this is not yet the time. The proprietary industry has had a huge head start, and we have to acknowledge that. And it will take a while for us to catch up. And we do lack the resources that proprietary firms do. But that said, you might be surprised by how much work can be done by a few motivated individuals. So I guess now is the time to wait and see. But there is still a scenario where it does make sense for a large company to start investigating open source. Not necessarily to replace existing workflows, but to be aware of how you can sort of push the boundaries, because the open source community likes to experiment, and we like to try pushing things that people might consider not currently possible. And if you really want to be on the cutting edge of technology, it is a good idea to at least be aware of what's happening in the open source community.
Yeah, that sounds good. You are doing this, right? You are trying. You are using this at a professional level in some cases, right?
Correct. So we have. I do know of an instance where completely open source software has been used to deliver a building from design right up until construction. So it is technically possible. I have also seen firms use purely open source software in a commercial environment for structural and CFD analysis and light simulation, as well as in GIS. So I have seen these things in use, and I've also seen them being pushed to the boundary. So, for example, the ability to create BIM models that contain all the data you need for light simulation and can be used out of the box for that, or how to generate construction documentation out of IFCs. Those are some examples of ways we're sort of pushing the boundaries of what's possible.